Welcome back to the Solid Verbal boys and girls. My name is Ty Hildenbrand, that fine gentleman over there is always Dan Rubenstein. Sir, welcome back. What's good?
Everything's good, Ty. Everything's good. We're talking together. We're talking football. We're talking West Coast football. I can't even say Pac-12 football anymore because it doesn't exist. Good job, everybody. But talking West Coast football a little bit more specifically, bringing on arguably our oldest, not in age, but our oldest in terms of tenure, I guess, friend, guest from the show. I go back to 2006. I interviewed him for the original college football tour guide. I happened to come across him on the USC campus, but he's been covering USC for a long time, but is still very young. Ryan Abraham, quite excited to have him on. And we do so every so often because he is as thorough and I think provides as much context and as complete a 10,000-foot view of anybody, if not more, when it comes to all things USC football, ups, downs, and otherwise. Hey, sorry for the quick interruption, but it'd be incredible if you considered subscribing to the Solid Verbal YouTube channel right down below.
We're starting to dip our toes a little bit in specific issues surrounding specific teams.
Yeah.
It's no secret what USC's issue is. USC's issue for the last couple years running has been defense.
Yeah.
Everyone's been fixated on defense. This year, I think it's right to fixate at least a little bit on offense because Caleb Williams is leaving. He's been a generational talent for the last 2 years at USC. What does the offense look like now without Caleb Williams, with Miller Moss or Jaden Maiava, whoever it ends up being, that is the trigger man? I have to imagine things are going to look at least a little bit different on the offensive side of the ball as well. So hopefully Ryan can give us context for what that looks like. You and I had kicked around this notion of what will it take? What will it take to get to the next level? What will it take to either win a conference championship, get in the playoff, be a national championship contender? I think that's a really good guide for how we are approaching some of these team-specific episodes that we're going to do, because every team has its own version of a hump that they need to get over.
Sure.
And USC's may be obvious, at least in previous years. This year, it might be a little bit more complex, but that's all to say I'm very excited to have Ryan from USCFootball.com back on the Solid Verbal podcast.
It's, by the way, and I'll ask Ryan about this. This is something I'm curious about. It's been a spring, winter of USC catching basically nothing but strays by draft analysts. I don't know if you've noticed that. We're like, okay, pros on Caleb Williams, right? It's the arm angles, it's the athleticism, it's the creativity, it's the improvisation, it's the, the once in a generation playmaking type quarterback back there. Downsides, and they'll list, timing, whatever it is, but like context for Caleb Williams, right? He was playing with a team that didn't have much defense, so he felt like he had to score a ton. Also, trash offensive line, trash skill talent, trash scheme. I got a lot of.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
I jotted down that exact question because we had Nate Tice on now from Yahoo.
Yes.
Congrats, Nate, if he's listening. We had Nate on and we talked to him about Caleb Williams. And my question was, Caleb Williams plays hero ball.
Right.
Justin Field also played hero ball. Are they drafting the same quarterback? Do we know that Caleb Williams will be better than Justin Fields?
Right.
And he went into a long explanation for why he believes Caleb Williams is better. And he mentioned some of those things that you just brought up.
I've saw it across the draft night, right? Like
across the board. The line, the receivers, the scheme. Those three things, I think, in particular, we have heard time and again. What's interesting about that, though, if you post anything like that out across social media, anywhere where USC fans have a chance to dissect it,
yeah,
the first thing they tell you is, what are you talking about the line? What are you talking about the skill talent?
Yeah.
There seems to be a bit of a disparity between the scouts that watch the tape and the fans that watch the game. And Ryan, I think, is a perfect guy who can give us a little bit more insight, a little bit more context into what is actually going on here. What is the root source of the problem? What should we be observing this coming football
and look, I think it's all relative to what I think maybe those scouts or college football fans, NFL fans, whatever, who are watching Lincoln Riley teams, when you see the types of game changers he's had on the line, especially at Oklahoma, when you've seen the kind of game-changing receivers. He's really had it both places, if you include Jordan Addison from a couple years ago, the best of Mario Williams, and it wasn't on display last year, but you know, CeeDee Lamb and Hollywood Brown, guys like that, where you're like, D.D. Westbrook, you're like, damn, like everything is just firing on all cylinders with this Lincoln Riley offense, whether it's Jalen Hurts or Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, whoever, Caleb Williams most recently. And so it's relative to, okay, now what is it that Caleb Williams is offering us, and what is the context of Caleb Williams' time at USC? And then when you compare, you know, the Oklahoma offensive lines to the last couple of USC ones, and you compare the Oklahoma receivers to, you know, especially last year's USC receiving core, and good. I thought the running game was mostly really good last year. It was just protection and communication stuff to my dumb eyes. So yeah, it's been a spring and a draft process that has not been kind to the USC program.
Well, we'll see what Ryan has to say. Again, Ryan Abraham, USCfootball.com.
Yeah.
From also
a lot
the
of new hires
podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On defense.
Ryan is doing a great job, can fill us in on what's going on with the USC defense as well, which of course is not to be overshadowed by any of this offensive talk that we speak of here on the show. Hit follow, hit subscribe wherever it is you are listening to this podcast. We greatly appreciate it. You can also get an ad-free version of this episode. Also get a little bit early if you go on out to verballers.com, VERBALLERS.com. That is our Patreon. You can sign up to support us for $5 to $10 per month. We offer various perks. We would appreciate you stopping on by, checking it out, maybe wondering if it's for you or not. That's all we can ask, right?
That's everything. Yeah, that's all I have. And with that, we welcome on, as Ty just mentioned, the legend, Ryan Abraham. 247 Sports, USCfootball.com, the Paris-style podcast, catches his own bluefin tuna in international waters. What can't he do? I've known Ryan for quite some time. He's been on the show a million times. We have to get him some sort of smoking jacket or something for being like in an exclusive club. Ryan, how are you?
I'm good. A verbal jacket. So,
yes.
Like, I like that.
Like a royal purple V right there. Yeah.
It's great. It's great to be on the show. Thank you so much. It's an honor. And just knowing, I think we both started our shows, I think the same year, like 2008.
Yeah.
Which, when it was like early podcasting worlds. And I mean, for different reasons, like being in LA, it's very pro town.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't do a lot of local radio because they wouldn't talk USC. They'd talk Lakers, Dodgers, or whatever.
Right.
Omaha, Nebraska would call me to talk about spring football all the time. And you're like, why? Well, why don't I just do my own show? So I didn't even listen to a podcast before, and I started one. So I don't know if you guys were the same way, but.
Oh, we are. And weirdly enough, we're all still 28, despite having started this show in 2008. It's crazy. Okay, so we're talking USC in 2024 because, one, they're always one of the more fascinating teams in the country. They have a high-profile coach. They're in a high-profile place. They're moving to a high-profile conference. We are in the midst of this transition. And the theme that is not exclusive to USC, we're doing this for a number of schools, is will it ever happen for blank? And obviously it is variable depending on the school. Will it ever happen for Lincoln Riley and USC? When you hear that question, what is your gut reaction?
Yeah, I think they always have the potential. You know, being a high-profile program in a high-profile place, we'll see what the world of NIL evolves into. But if you are a superstar in Los Angeles, it does help. You know, Caleb Williams, I saw him courtside at a Laker game getting dapped up by Kevin Durant after one of the games. I was like, okay, so you can't do that everywhere. I think there's some unique advantages, and there's probably some disadvantages too. But to me, it was always about leadership, and you need good leadership, especially when the whole landscape of the sport that you're in is changing like on an hourly basis. And for decades, USC had really bad leadership, kind of lucked into Pete Carroll, and he was really good and he did good things, but after that, with bad athletic directors that didn't know what they were doing, making bad hires for years and years, I think they needed to sort of like come out of that. And now the challenge is it's definitely a lot different, where money's involved in the whole recruiting process and retention process. You're now in an 18-team league with Michigan and Ohio State and Oregon and Washington, Wisconsin and Penn State and all these programs. To win the conference is significantly harder than it was in the Pac-12, and USC's only done it once in the last decade or so. So I think they have that potential, but you have to kind of bring, everything together. But I think Jen Cohen is the athletic director. She's doing a really good job. And I think Lincoln Riley's, proven that he can, be an elite head coach. Can he win a championship? I don't know, but he's gone to the playoffs before in a different environment, but we'll see if he's able to do it with USC. So I think they have the potential, but there's a lot of work to be done. But for me, it's always about leadership for USC, and they've just had a lot of bad leadership at presidential level, AD level, coaching level for a long time.
So it's an interesting term, leadership, because as you mentioned, it covers a lot of different people. And so obviously people think Lincoln Riley immediately with USC for good reason, but the word on Mike Bohn was he's the stabilizing force, right? After all sorts of ADs who don't work out. He's an outsider. He comes in, he makes these hires, and they have an adult in the room finally. And they didn't, right? That didn't work out for Mike Bohn. They hire Jen Cohen from Washington, but leadership, as you mentioned, right, on the presidential level, it also means like on the NIL level, right? How many collectives are there? Is there one collective? Are there three collectives? Are they communicating? Is everything structured in a way that, the leadership is sort of broadcasting a unified message to guys in the portal, recruits, current team members? What is the state of the alignment of all of that moving forward in a universe that will probably see more change with NIL and revenue sharing with TV deals? But where's USC in terms of hierarchy and success?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I think when you look at what Mike Bohn came into after Pat Hayden and Lynn Swann, the two worst, you could argue which one was worse athletic directors in USC history. If you were just somewhat competent, you would be a significant improvement. I think he was. I think he left the program in a better place than when he found it, which you couldn't say really to anyone else the last, 30 years or whatever. So I think that was a positive. But he ran out of steam. I think when Brandon Sosna, his right-hand man, left, I think that sort of, he's with the Detroit Lions now and they're doing really good. I feel like, now you needed to bring someone in that, okay, you've elevated a little bit. Now you get to the Jen Cohen level, and she seems like there's a really high ceiling with her. I think she has embraced the NIL world, where I think Mike Bohn was a little hesitant to do that, maybe a little more old school. I think a lot of athletic departments were struggling with, well, if we tell people to donate to our collective, are they going to donate to the department so we can build new fountains or whatever you want to do?
Right.
So I feel like some athletic departments were struggling with that, and I think Mike Bohn was one of them. And I think Jen Cohen's embraced it. They've made a lot of, they're nowhere near like an Oregon or Ohio State or something when it comes to NIL, but I feel like they've made significant strides over the last year or so. It's kind of a different beast, but they've got boosters on board. I think they're still trying to get like the regular fans to realize, hey, this is a thing that you need to contribute to. But they've, just in the last year, I've seen the House of Victory as their main collective now, grow a lot. And, they've hired some good people. They've got some bigger boosters on board. I think it's been a slow build. USC's never usually one of those early adapters. Like I think Texas A&M was like the first one to realize, hey, this is going on. Boom, collectives, money. I think USC took a couple years, and it really helped that Tennessee, Virginia, lawsuit there, where it basically said the NCAA doesn't have power over NIL and collectives because their collective wasn't even involved in the recruiting process up until a couple of months ago. So they were sort of on the more conservative side of, well, this is what the rules are. We're not going to break them, where other, programs were like, hey, it's okay, you can do this. So I think it's probably leveled the playing field a little bit now that some of these lawsuits and stuff that come out. But I would say they're getting better, but they're a little behind the curve when it comes to that. I think they're going in the right direction, but they haven't been on the forefront of like being, we're in LA, they do all this NIL stuff. They're coming along, and I think Jen Cohen gets it, which is good. Yeah. So it's kind of a slow build, I guess.
So we are now post spring practice, and there's a lot new with everybody, with transfer portal stuff and new conferences, whatever. But it feels like there's an especially huge amount that's new with USC. When you look at a new defensive coaching staff, new quarterback, new conference, there's just, I think the vibes seem to be pretty good. I know it's sort of, I'm sure USC fans are sort of up and down on the portal season USC has had, but it seemed like the vibes were good coming out of spring, especially on defense. I'm an outsider, but to you, How are the post-spring vibes with USC football?
Yeah, it's funny. After the bowl game, they were actually pretty positive. Beating Louisville in the Holiday Bowl, and Miller Moss, throwing 6 touchdowns. And it was a weird offseason for USC. Like, it's sort of like if you look at like Michigan, Ohio State offseason. Like, Michigan won the national championship. Ohio State's kind of winning the offseason. Like, which would you rather do? USC's won a lot of off seasons, like, oh, they're getting these transfers or these players or, all these things that off. And then when you get to the field, on Saturdays in the fall, they weren't doing quite as well. And it feels like they're trying to do the reverse here, where maybe they're not getting the splashy signings and transfers, especially on the defensive line. USC fans are ask any one of us if we can play defensive tackle. They want that's all they want to know. But I think a lot of programs are going through
Bear
that.
Alexander needs a friend. Yeah.
He needs a friend up there. But I feel like they're doing the behind-the-scenes work, the infrastructure work, the stuff that you need to do to really be successful instead of maybe the flashy off-season kind of stuff. And, getting D'Anton Lynn, who doesn't have a lot of experience, but really turned around that UCLA defense. And I was really impressed with him just because sometimes you come from the NFL and you want a, 3-inch thick playbook, and he seemed to get it right away that we only get these guys 20 hours a week. We have to make this simple, make it look complicated to the opponent, make it simple. He seemed to get that right away. And then sort of over hiring, where your linebacker coach was a national championship winning head coach in the FCS level, or your secondary coach, Doug Belk was a defensive coordinator at a Power 5 program. So I feel like Lincoln Riley, if you didn't think he was taking defense seriously, and maybe he wasn't, he seems to be doing that now. So I feel like some of that infrastructure build hasn't been a typical kind of USC offseason. It wasn't been as flashy, and you might not see the results until, are you going to be as excited like right now in May? Maybe not. But I think USC fans know, like, hey, if this coaching staff works out, they were one of the worst defenses in the country the last 2 years, certainly in Power 5. And if they can get into the top half or whatever and still have a really potent offense like they've had the last couple of years, you can be a really significantly better program. So I think there's some optimism post spring, from that. But a lot of it's not maybe the flashy stuff. It's more of the sort of behind the scenes build that maybe USC hasn't really done a lot of in the last couple decades, I guess.
So look, Ryan, I realize it plays better online to reduce everything down to the lowest common, snarkiest possible denominator. I am desperate to not do that with the USC defense because genuinely, I want to know your USC guru take, the nuance behind the USC defense and how it got to where it is right now. What is the root cause of all of this? Is it recruiting? Is it coaching? Is it
He's just going to say
nutrition?
Yes.
What's it? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of things. I know that, but what is the root cause that as D'Anton Lynn takes over this defense, he is focused most on here in the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys are both right. It has to be a combination of all that. But I think at the top, it's on the coaching side. I mean, we've seen, some talented defenders come through the program, and still the overall defense hasn't been very good. I think the linebacker spot, especially for the last 5-6 years, it's like, oh, these looks like good players, and then they just aren't a very productive group. And when your linebackers aren't productive, it's sort of like the middle of that defense. You really want those guys to be able to shine. They can make up plays. They're running sideline to sideline, and if they're sort of erased and a guard pulls and takes your dude out and there's no one there. I mean, it's just things like that. It just for years they just haven't seemed to get a lot of production, especially from the linebacker spot. So I think the coaching part is a big issue there. I mean, even when they had like Todd Orlando was coming in as a defensive coordinator, he was like a linebacker specialist. He was working. I'm like, hey, they're going to be better. He's going to work with the linebackers. No, it didn't matter. And then even last year, thought they got a lot better talent on the defensive side, where maybe in year one of Lincoln Riley, they added superstars on offense like Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison. And then last year, I think they added more superstars on the defensive side, and the defense was still pretty terrible. So I think it's more on the coaching side and having someone that sort of kind of gets the college game. And, Alex Grinch, for whatever reason, it didn't seem to work. And I feel like when we saw something not work with Lincoln Riley's offense where guys were confused or whatever, he made a change and it was working like the next day. With Alex Grinch, you saw players like looking at their wristbands, confused before the play starting, and that just kept happening for like 2 years. And it was almost like, this is how I do it, and if the players can't get it, oh well. And that just, to me, that's not how you're going to coach in college. So Dan Lynn said it's going to be kind of a slow, learning process. They're not going to install everything, in the spring, and they're going to keep building on it. But all the players we talked to, they seem to be, on board with it. Even, I asked Josh Henson, the offensive line coach, about the differences, and he was like, it was kind of funny. A quote that I don't want to say viral, but it went around all the USC circles where he said, well, before our offensive linemen were kind of going out to, the defensive linemen were trying to run around us. Now the guys are trying to run through us. And they feel like the guys are bigger and more physical, and they're actually kind of challenging some of the players on offense, head to head, as opposed to kind of like the speed defense where you're trying to just make a big play. I think that was more Alex Grinch's thing. So I think the main thing is probably coaching. They probably still need to add some, defensive talent, especially on the line. But I feel if you took the talent they had the last 2 years, it was good enough to be way better than what they were. So if the talent's there, and I think the coaching is the thing that needs to change the most. So that's what they're banking on now, changing the whole coaching staff, basically, getting Dan Lynn in there, who took a 80 or 90 ranked defense into the teens or whatever he did. You want something kind of similar to that at USC, and that's what I think they're being optimistic about.
Yeah, you sort of stole my thunder a little bit, bringing up the personnel group. No, it's cool. Perfect segue. What is your level of confidence with the personnel that they have on hand? I know you said they need to add more bodies, need to try and beef up the line, defense as a whole. But given what's on the roster right now, what's like the Ryan Abraham assessment of how that compares to previous iterations of this defense?
The secondary, I think they're really deep. They have a lot of talent there, and bringing in a couple of guys that are familiar, like John Humphrey and Kamari Ramsey from UCLA, that are familiar with Danton Lynn's defense. I think that helps a lot. They brought a couple of Oregon State transfers down. Easton Mascarenas Arnold is going to be probably the middle linebacker. We talked to him last week. He has the headsets on, where they're with the in-helmet communication, kind of running the defense. And I feel like the back seven, they're going to be in a good place. I like Eric Gentry a lot. He's kind of a weird, they call him like the giraffe. He's got this 6'6" frame, what are you going to do with him? He's going to move around and play different positions. And, and the defensive line, I think, is where the big sort of question is going to be. They got some big bodies like a Bear Alexander in there, but can you work everyone else in and be effective as far stopping the run and getting after the passer? There's some veterans there. Jamil Muhammad, I thought, had some up and down moments last year after he transferred in. They're just not going to be as deep on the defensive line, but I think as a whole they have the personnel to be successful. Maybe a little thin at the defensive line, but on the other spots, I think they're doing a pretty good job, especially in the secondary. Can they put it all together and make it work on Saturdays? Can they tackle better? Right. Not giving up 3rd and 12s and all that kind of stuff. Just a lot of things that we saw the last couple of years. That's kind of the big question. But I think personnel-wise, I think they're pretty close. They would like USC fans have just been asking every time we say something like, "Oh, USC signed a punter or something," like, "Could he play defensive tackle?" Like that's just what comes up all the time.
It's interesting now as USC makes this move into the Big Ten, because I think the next logical question is which teams or which style of teams in the new conference scare you the most. You've got a team like a Michigan who, if the trends continue, would be more of a ground and pound team that would attack that defensive line. No, Penn State, I almost said Notre Dame. My God. Penn State obviously
USC
has
plays
a stable
Notre
of
Dame
running
too.
backs.
It's all relative.
USC does play Notre Dame, and they also like the ground
Yeah.
and pound to some extent. So is that the style of team that scares you the most going into a new conference? Are there other deficiencies that you think could be exploited? When you look out across this USC schedule this coming season, which are the landmines that you're fearful of the most?
Yeah, I think the physicality is what everyone's going to be talking about going into the Big Ten. And for USC, I think I don't think they were. I think the short yardage stuff, they were just sort of more of a finesse team. And I think this offseason they've tried to remedy some of that, and you're seeing the strength gains, and everyone does that every offseason. But you're like, oh, the defensive line gained 300 pounds or all that kind of stuff. But I think that's where, at least that's what they're focusing on. I think that would be probably the biggest concern. It's interesting, though, because, they have a really tough schedule. If you have LSU to start the season, you got Notre Dame, and then the Big Ten schedule. But if they're like, if they can take care of their own business, there's a lot of teams that they can beat on the schedule, and maybe the two toughest Big Ten teams, where they were in the national championship game last year, Washington and Michigan, but they both, new coaches, their whole, they're going to be completely different teams this year. And probably the two most talented teams, they don't play, Ohio State and Oregon. So it could be, it could be an interesting first year in the Big Ten. But they, for me, it's more about USC kind of taking care of their business, because you could go on the road and lose to Maryland or lose to, Wisconsin at home. But if, those teams, you're probably more talented than you're probably going to be favored in those games. If you can take care of those, there's some tough ones, of course, LSU, Notre Dame, Michigan and Washington, like I said, but a couple of those, you're talking about complete rebuilds and stuff. So, I mean, they have a puncher's chance, but it's going to be a lot, the schedule's going to be, significantly tougher than what they saw the last couple of years. So to me, it's more just about, hey, can you take care of stuff, in-house and kind of take it to the next level? But I would say those physical teams are probably the ones that they're going to be worried about the most.
To Lincoln Riley's credit, he did look inward with the defensive coaching staff, and he was quite loyal to Alex Grinch for a long time, realized it wasn't working, and made the moves. I'm sure he had the support of, money behind the program, sort of, telling him, this is what you're going to do. You're going to make some changes on the defensive staff. And he did. And it seems quite promising for USC that there are new voices in the room. What else has Lincoln Riley done, if anything, to sort of look inward and say, look, we're not going to lose 5 games or whatever again at USC? That's unacceptable. Is it how they practice? Is it culture behind the scenes? Is it, a lot of people will criticize offensive coaches for not letting the defense run wild in practice and tackling. I don't think we saw much tackling in the spring game, for instance, this year. Like, is there anything that Lincoln Riley has looked at himself and like, I have to do X, Y, and Z different the way this team is run for us to sort of hit that 10-11 win threshold again?
Yeah, I don't think losing 5 games sat very well with him. Like you mentioned, it was not pleasant. And I feel like, he probably loyal to a fault with Alex Grinch. And I think the weird aspect was that I feel like he gave Alex Grinch sort of like a little more power than even he needed, because some of the players that could have been bigger were like smaller on purpose. So I think some of those gains from these offseason workouts, that's what I was kind of questioning. Like, you still have the same head coach. You still have Benny Wiley, the strength and conditioning coach. And now they're all these guys are putting on weight and everything. And you're like, well, I mean, the only thing that changed was the defensive coordinator. So did Alex Grinch say, hey, I want smaller, faster guys, so don't get too big? And now they're like, now you have Denton Lynn's like, no, we want some bulk here.
Right.
So I think maybe that was one of the things too, where it wasn't just you kept him on board, but you actually gave him a lot of say in how, like, the makeup of the physical makeup of what these defenders were. So I think that, and on the practice side, we don't get to watch a lot. We're just watching the kind of beginnings of stuff. But, talking to players, it did seem things like they were a little different. We know that Lincoln Riley was going to, giving up the quarterback coaching duties. So Luke Heward's going to do that now, giving him a little bit more kind of roam, privileges, I guess, where you can go around and be in defensive meetings. And he talked about that going into 2023, that he was going to be more involved on the defensive side, but it didn't seem like that was really the case. And now I think he is. I think it's more of, embracing that. It's his baby. And even not being able to be the quarterback's coach, when we were asking about it, it was sort of like, I got to do it, but like that's his thing. He's really good at it. So you don't really want to give up something that you're great at. I don't know if he'll ever give up the play calling duties, because that's sort of what makes him, the kind of coach that he is. But I do like that he's more involved maybe in the rest of the team. And, I think on the special teams aspect as well, they've been kind of bad with that. But, you've got these problem areas and you're the head man. You have to address them head on. I think he intended to do that last year. It just didn't work. And I think this was like a full rebuy into, we have to do this. Just go get the best coaches you can possibly get, put them in the right position, oversee them. And I think that's kind of been the biggest difference this offseason.
I'm glad you mentioned quarterback, because we're in like weird, uncharted territory at quarterback with Lincoln Riley, where it always seemed like he either had an obvious 5-star freshman coming in, or he had a 5-star caliber transfer coming in, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Caleb Williams at USC. And now it's Miller Moss, who has been a career backup. It is Jaden Mayava transferring in from UNLV, losing what at one time we thought was going to be the future of USC at quarterback in Malachi Nelson, who didn't work out at USC, is at Boise State. And do you get the sense that the ceiling on either of these guys competing for the job, and I know this sounds like a leading question, and it's not meant to be, like, answer yes if you believe yes. Is Miller Moss's ceiling of the Lincoln Riley caliber quarterback tree? Is Jaden Mayava's ceiling of that caliber ceiling? Do you get that sense, or is just going to be a different way that USC and Lincoln Riley are going to win this year?
I think it's probably going to be a different way. I think with Jaden Mayava, when talking, he was, Mountain West Freshman of the Year there, looked really good. I think he does have a high ceiling. I think with Miller Moss, it's going to be a very different look. I did like what he did against a pretty good Louisville defense. Bowl games don't mean a whole lot, but 6 touchdown passes, and they weren't like dump off. 5 of them were thrown into the end zone, and he really bonded with this young group. They got 4 sophomore wide receivers that have looked really spectacular at different points of the time. So I think that's a pretty core group. With Caleb Williams, number 1 pick in the NFL draft, won the Heisman Trophy, comparisons to Patrick Mahomes. Albert Breer wrote a really good story about if you got to check it out, on what went into the Bears' mindset when you pick him. And if you read that story, it's even more impressive, everything that kind of Caleb Williams does. But you feel like with Miller Moss, he's going to work within the constraints of whatever the offense is. So sort of like what Sean Payton really wanted, Russell Wilson to do in Denver. It wasn't really working out. He's more of an improv guy. And, it worked. The improv thing worked. But I think with Miller Moss, it's going to be, here's what the plays are, and then you're probably going to be running pretty close to exactly what that is. And then, if you have to do some improv stuff, you can.
Right.
So I think it's going to be different. I think he's got a high IQ, football IQ. I think he's shown he can execute what, Lincoln Riley is asking for. So it'll be interesting to see Lincoln Riley sort of shift from, man, I called that play and then Caleb did this, but then it was a touchdown. It didn't matter anyway, to hey, if my play call's good, it's going to be, executed well by Miller Moss. For the future, Mayava, I think he could be more of that guy that there's improv and stuff going on. But I don't think he's ready to be a starting quarterback in the Big Ten quite yet, just from what we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it'll be different. I think with Miller Moss, we'll see, if he's able to keep that up, week after week, and execute what's going on. But I feel like it's going to be a different way to win. Lincoln Riley's won with a lot of different kind of quarterbacks, so we'll see I don't know if there's been one like Miller Moss. We'll see if he can be the next one in the long line of whatever whoever quarterback Riley touches seems to work out pretty good.
What is the state of USC's high school recruiting right now? Obviously, they have 2 hugely high-profile commitments from players from across the country. Is there belief that they're going to hold on to those guys? Is there belief that they're going to continue to grow their national recruiting footprint, which USC sorely needs, especially on the West Coast? If you want to, string together top 10 classes, it's not going to strictly come from California. And there was, a quote that I think raised some eyebrows from Lincoln Riley that's saying, everybody wants us to recruit California. Sorry, we're not doing that. What is the state of USC's recruiting and ceiling for USC's recruiting right now?
Yeah, I think it helped that they brought in Eric Henderson from the Rams, who coached Aaron Donald, and he just seems to be, for an NFL guy, he's been like an ace recruiter for USC. And I think having Aaron Donald on campus for one of the big recruiting weekends, and they got some defensive linemen from Georgia and stuff to commit, I think that's helped. That was sort of the high water mark a month or so ago, and then it's been kind of okay since then, but that was a big one. I think all of that did come after when the NCAA backed off the NIL rules that you were supposed to follow. The collective House of Victory was able to get involved in the recruiting process, and I think that's helped a lot. But again, USC was a little behind in that, where it wasn't a big part of the recruiting weekend. You weren't meeting with the head of the collective to tell you what you could possibly do when you got here. So they're doing that now. So I think it's on the upswing a little bit. I think they've done a pretty good job with evaluations. Even the players they've brought in for the class of 2024, you're like, okay, these guys look like, they can play. Maybe he was a high 3-star, but he looks like he can, be a player there and things like that. So I think they're doing okay, but they're not it's not gangbusters like a lot of people thought when Lincoln Riley sort of came in, that you were just going to be, bringing in all this 5-star talent all the time. I think they can get there. But especially on the defensive side, they needed to kind of prove something on the field. In the last 2 years, they didn't really do anything. But I think the new staff has got some good energy on the defensive side, and he'll always be able to get offensive players. To me, it's more like the linemen. California can recruit a lot of skill guys.
Right.
Quarterbacks come out of here. The linemen, it's just we've seen it be more of a developmental thing where you're getting a 255-pound offensive lineman that's 305 by his sophomore year, and he's can potentially be all conference. Where if you're getting from the South, like you're getting guys that look like NFL bodies already. It's just been a little different. So I think that's why you have to be able to recruit nationally. It's just we're not seeing the same level of ready-made linemen on the West Coast that we were maybe 15 years ago, like in the Pete Carroll era.
So I'm curious because you bring up offense. When you watched ESPN, when you watched whatever draft shows anybody or mock drafts that people were evaluating Caleb Williams, they had, an overflowing number of things positive to say about Caleb Williams. But something that came up over and over and over again, it seemed, was USC's offensive line, USC's receivers, and really USC's scheme catching strays, saying Caleb Williams didn't have much to work with up front. Didn't have, his receivers, there was a drop off after having Jordan Addison in 2022. And scheme wise, it was very confusing what USC was trying to do, and was sort of leaving points on the board. To what degree do you think that was a fair evaluation of USC's offense last year? And I think to spin it positively, add any sort of context and give the people coast to coast around the globe reasons to believe that the offensive line, the skill talent was, for whatever reason, in a weird place last year, but will be better this year.
Yeah, I think the offensive line criticism is warranted. I think they moved some guys around, and you had some veterans like Jonah Monheim playing left tackle. Maybe not his best position. Justin Dietich moved into center, and he did fine there. Now they're moving Monheim back to center, and he's probably going to be a interior offensive lineman at the NFL level. They had some transfers that kind of missed on. It just didn't quite work. Where I thought their first year they did a nice job with a group of veterans and some transfers they brought in, and the chemistry worked. The offensive line is kind of one of those, like if you talk to offensive linemen, it's like 5 fingers on a hand. They all have to work together. I think that hand worked pretty well 2022. It just wasn't quite working in 2023, and I think that put a lot more pressure on Caleb Williams and him trying to make plays. And he can be a hero. He can go out there and do crazy things. And it was weird, though, how the skill positions didn't quite work. I mean, we saw,
yeah.
I think, you've had for a couple years in a row, they bring in Travis Dye, who was a really good leader from Oregon. And for the culture part of it, I give Lincoln Riley credit because there was a whole lot of transfers, and somehow it was the locker room was cohesive, and you got guys like Dye coming in as new players and being leaders in there. And Austin Jones from Stanford was kind of the number 2 guy the last 2 years. I thought he did well. And they bring in Marshawn Lloyd from South Carolina, and he was drafted fairly high. And, he was a fan favorite and someone that could be a leader in the locker room too. So I felt like they were good at the running back spot. Jordan Addison year 1, and he was amazing. And they bring in Dorian Singer last year from, he was the number 2 receiver in the Pac-12 out of Arizona. And it just didn't click for whatever reason. And, they had some good individual players there. Like Brendan Rice led the team in touchdowns. He was drafted, late. Taj Washington was just steady. Maybe not, the superstar kind of guy, but always made plays, had over 1,000 yards, and he ended up getting drafted too. So those were kind of the guys that Caleb Williams rely on. But you thought Singer could be that number 1 guy. They just never really had one of those. So I feel like they were pretty good, and the younger players, those freshmen, there was 4 freshmen that, have all looked really good. And I think they're going to be the core of that receiving group now, and they all have like superstar, potential with Deuce Robinson and Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon and Zachariah Branch. And they're all like potential superstars. But last year there was like this kind of void of a number 1 guy, and they thought it was going to be Singer, and it just never kind of worked out. So I think some of the criticism is warranted, but I feel like, it's really more about the offensive line. They had some good players there, but for whatever reason, they didn't gel and it didn't work together. And then not having a number one receiver like a Jordan Addison, I think that kind of hurt them as well.
Just a few more for you, Ryan. We've talked about vibes on offense and defense. What are the vibes about joining the Big Ten as a whole, both in terms of the people that are running the USC program and the people such as yourself who are covering the program? Like, what's it done to the travel budget, Ryan? How do you feel about this huge transition that you're about to witness?
He abandoned the East Coast, and now he's being forced to go back.
I know.
He's from, I think, Massachusetts, right? Is that where you're from?
I went to high school in Massachusetts. One of my writers is from Maryland, went to Maryland, so he's excited for that trip. But yeah, the travel budget's going up for sure. That's okay, whatever. I think there'll be some fun trips. Usually it's the Notre Dame game. You go into Chicago and everything. And
sure.
Now you got like 4 of those a year, so that'll be a little bit different. But we'll see. I think there's a potential for a lot more listeners to your podcast if USC's hosting Washington State versus like Wisconsin. Probably a little bit different feel for what's going on there, but it's hard to kind of wrap your arms around it. Even when we were talking about the 2024 recruiting class, and they're never going to play a Pac-12 game. They're going into the Big Ten, and that was just hard to kind of wrap your mind around. Like this is a Big Ten class already, and I think it's hard for people to sort of grasp. And for USC and UCLA, they were kind of the first to go over. Oregon and Washington coming in there, but like if you're a Cal fan and you're going to the ACC, like what? Like this, a lot of this stuff is really weird. I think the fans are on board. I think USC fans probably more than UCLA fans they're happy with that. They've been in the Rose Bowl a lot. They've played a lot of those teams. There's a lot of tradition there between some of the bigger brands, Michigan and Ohio State and some Penn State games and things. And for us in the media, I don't know. It's still hard to sort of grasp. I mean, I'm still doing a Pac-12 podcast. It's like now we got to figure out what we're going to do going forward, because it was a lot of fun to kind of we still talk about these teams. It's like all the teams that used to be together and now they're not. And so I don't know if
they didn't move. Like Utah is still located in Salt Lake City, but
I'm doing like a Utah radio show tomorrow. I'm like, what? Why? Like we're not. USC's not playing. I don't know, but I guess
Ryan, your deep Texas Tech thoughts and Utah, how they match up. Right.
It's weird, and it's just hard to sort of come to terms like this is going to be the reality. But I think USC and I can't speak for like Oregon or Washington fans. I think they're excited too. It's just UCLA. I think they wanted to be on the West Coast more, and I think most fans would love to still have these regional games and everything, but knowing just the landscape, you kind of have to do it. And I think they've did a pretty good job of kind of buying in to be like, hey, are they happy they're not going to play Cal and Stanford every year like they have for 100 years or whatever? Like, I think they would love to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But, when you got some fun games on the schedule, you're like, you're going to the Big House. Like, okay, like that's going to be a good time, Like, is UCLA going to Rutgers going to be a lot of fun? Probably not, but there's a lot of cool games, that you're going to be able to embrace.
A lot of new combinations for sure. Let's bring it full circle. Let's bring it right back to the top where we started this whole conversation. For the USC fans listening, full disclosure, I am playing devil's advocate with this thought experiment. So I don't want to catch the strays. I just got to complete the cycle here, Ryan. Okay.
Sure.
Caleb Williams, as you described, arguably the most decorated USC quarterback in a good long time, certainly since Matt Leinart. Now he's gone. There is a case to be made that if Lincoln Riley couldn't do it with him, it's never going to happen. So to bring this whole thing full circle, will it ever happen for Lincoln Riley at USC?
It's you cover the team and you're around it. Sometimes I think you can be overly pessimistic. Sometimes I try to just be sort of even keel, and sometimes you're wrong, and the fans will get mad at you. Like I said, hey, the defense is going to be better last year, and they were worse. They were awful, and they're like, what you're talking about. I'm like, fair enough. My feeling is that they can get it right. That when it works at USC, there are just some inherent advantages that you probably don't get other places, and the game has changed. And I think you could make a bunch of bad decisions before at USC and just it sort of didn't matter as much. You could make some bad hires, but it was still USC. Were you kind of like you were Alabama on the West Coast and there wasn't a Georgia or an LSU or a Florida anywhere near you. So even if you didn't do it perfect, you could do okay. That's not the case anymore. You're going to have to play, you have to do things kind of perfectly. But with the leadership they have in place, I do feel that, if things work out right, they have the potential to make this work and go to the playoff. They've never been to a playoff before. Go to the first time,
No.
I feel like they can do that. And it's not just about, how good was Caleb Williams, because he was amazing. We've seen Lincoln Riley have a lot of amazing quarterbacks, but it's hard to have a really good team with only a great offense. So to me now it's more about, hey, you got a pretty good defense, just average defense. But if you get a pretty good defense with a top 5, top 10 sort of offense that doesn't maybe have the Caleb Williams heights, but still puts up a ton of points, then yeah, you're going to beat a lot of teams on your schedule. So I think they can do it. We'll see. Lincoln Riley took over a great situation with Bob Stoops, and this is a rebuild. Maybe year 1 was ahead of schedule, and then year 2 sort of dropped behind. Can he kind of put it all together and build it up and do it? I think he can. Proofs will be in the pudding, but I really feel, Ty, that they have the potential to do that if they can, get it all working.
Final question. You are the expert. You are the local. I'm a former local. If you are a fan of a Big Ten team visiting downtown Los Angeles, so that includes Wisconsin fans, Penn State fans, Rutgers fans, Nebraska fans, where should somebody eat Los Angeles food in downtown LA?
Oh my God, there's so many.
I have my answer, but you're there every day.
I'm gonna go. I say let's do Philippe's.
Good answer.
Potentially the home of the French dip sandwich. I think there's some argument there, but it's a really good sort of downtown place that you can go to. There'll be a line. It's like deli counter kind of stuff. That was a great one. There's a lot of good options down there. I don't know if I told you, Dan, there was this, I can't even remember the name of it, but there was like a not Michelin star, but a Michelin rated taco place near USC's campus that a friend took me to the other day. And it was like big, long line, but it was, I forget what it's called, Michelin rated, or it was one of those, the chef was there. I'll find it out for you, send it to you. But
was it okay? So I have my answer, and it's a taco place that's excellent near the USC's campus called Sonora Town.
Okay.
That would be my recommendation. Philippe's is great. Ty, Philippe's, as he mentioned, French dip. Take it easy on the spicy mustard. It's a little bit more potent than you think, right? Start slow with the spicy mustard. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
All right.
No, that's a great one too. Yeah, I'll give you. I forget the other name, but I'll give you that one. But Philippe's is like a mainstay, and then there's a lot of good stuff in LA. But Philippe's is one you wouldn't regret going to.
All right, Ryan Abraham, 247 USC Football, the Peristyle Podcast. It's just such a no-brainer to subscribe to the Peristyle if you're at all interested in USC football, and to check out uscfootball.com. Thank you, as always, for all of your time and insight.
Thank you guys so much. Honor again, and appreciate all you do.
All right, there you go. Ryan Abraham back on the show for the umpteenth time, always giving us insight on USC football. Again, check him out at uscfootball.com, the Peristyle Podcast. As we said at the top, Ryan is a luminary in the USC digital media space. He has been here forever, doing this forever. Nobody knows more about this than him. And as always, we're grateful for his time.
Who would we be sending? SNL has the 5 Timers Club thing where they have the velvet smoking jackets or whatever.
Yeah.
And Paul Rudd and Tina Fey and Steve Martin. I guess what? We've got Bruce Feldman, Andy Staples.
Bruce, Andy, probably Ari at this point. Obviously Ryan. He's been on our show a bunch of times.
Jed Williams.
Back in the day.
Remember
Jed
him?
Williams. Yeah. Chip Patterson probably gets one of those jackets as well. Chip's been on the show got a multitude of times. I don't know how long it's been, but Chip's been on this show a gazillion times.
Yeah.
Stu Mandel has been on the show.
Sure. He's been on a bunch. Pete
bunch
Sampson
of times as well. Pete, yeah. We've had Pete. Any Oregon guys other than you?
That we've had on the show? Recently, we've had Matt Premont, I think, a couple times.
Matt,
from
I don't think he gets the jacket.
247.
He's
not quite at that level yet.
Spencer probably gets a jacket.
Spencer Hall, sure.
He's been on the show a multitude of times.
Come on, Ty. Anybody else?
Man, it's tough. It's tough to go back through the Rolodex here and figure out who we've had, who we've not had.
We're forgetting somebody stupid, I'm sure. But yeah, Had Bud on a bunch. Yeah.
Bud, yeah.
All right. So let's
a
get
lot of
those smoking
jackets.
jackets going. Come on, Ty.
In all these years, it's a lot of jackets to give out, but maybe we can look into that. Richard, we've had Richard on a bunch of times
course.
too, right?
Nicole.
Nicole.
Nicole Auerbach, a ton. Yeah.
We could probably go through and figure this out. It would take
It's
all
a lot
day.
of jackets. Damn it. Okay.
Definitely blows the budget.
Adam Amin has been on a ton,
Adam?
explaining the broadcast industry.
Nope.
That's great. Okay.
Nope. Nate Tice is getting close too.
Nate Tice is getting up there.
I don't think it's
Absolutely.
been 5 appearances quite yet, but maybe next year.
It's adding up. All right.
It is.
By the way, Ryan is such an insider that he sent me a picture of his dinner last night to counter my pizza pictures. He sent me a picture of his poke plate.
I saw he posted that online.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
He posted it. It was bedtime, Ty, for the little guys, so I was not on Twitter. But he sent me the picture. He caught the tuna himself, which is not. I didn't process a pig for my pepperonis, so he's on a different level. He caught the bluefin tuna, froze it, and then he said if he didn't make it because of his own tuna spoiling or something, he apologized. But that's pretty impressive, right? To break down your own bluefin tuna for poke. That's good.
Some man versus wild stuff out there.
Absolutely.
All right. USCfootball.com, Peristyle Podcast. Hope y'all learned something. I know we did. We'll continue doing this now through the month of May, throughout the off season. As time permits, look, there are a bunch of teams. We've got a bunch of questions about those teams, and we're going to do our best to try and answer them and give you a little bit more insight as we begin this slow build into the college football preseason. We're not in the preseason yet. Still the off season. Give it like 2 months. Then we're going to start calling it the preseason. So we're kind of revving the engines up here, getting into position, and hopefully getting off on the right foot.
This is when you are working on your deadlift PR, right?
Correct.
That's
correct.
You're sort of in that gym grinding this
That's right.
off season because you got to improve something. And Ty's squatting and deadlifting like you cannot. He can barely fit through a door. If you're watching this, you can see. If you're not watching this, get on YouTube and subscribe so you can see. Just Ty is just bursting through shirts. It's crazy.
We talk every morning about activating the glutes, Dan. You know this.
You joke, Ty? My life has been so much better since I started paying attention to activating my glutes.
Got to activate.
When you have
the
lower
glutes.
back pain and hamstring issues, you got to focus on what's important, and
do
that's
have
on
to
active
activate.
glutes, Ty. You know
Activating the glutes is important when you sit at a desk all day.
that's
Keep-
true.
keep them in
100%.
motion.
I joke not.
I know.
It's huge. That's all.
Hit follow, hit subscribe, wherever it is you get this podcast. We appreciate you hanging with us here, learning a little bit about USC. Big thanks again to Ryan Abraham, our guest of honor today. We will be back next week talking, more college football. Again, follow, subscribe, go on out to verballers.com. Check out what we have to offer on Patreon. For that guy over there, my beloved glute-activated co-host.
Yes, sir.
For myself, Ty Hildenbrandt. Thanks again for tuning in. As always, stay solid.
Get yourself a lacrosse ball. Peace.